everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Drive-In. I am your host, Aaron Lopez, as always, and I am joined this week by a former guest host, Jonathan Evans. He is here, having last been on we were just talking about it, the 3+ hour, 2-part Avengers Infinity War episodes. That was a very long discussion. We don't think it's going to be as long this time. But no, it'll be just as good. John, thanks for coming on.
Oh, it's great to be here. I'm excited.
Cool. So today we're doing something different. John is the guinea pig in this new kind of segment, in this new style that we're going to do every now and then. Instead of doing a specific review on a movie that we've done, the majority, this is episode 37, I think 34, 35 or so of these episodes have been a specific movie review. We're doing it a little differently here and there. We're going to look at a specific genre or topic when we do these styles of episodes. And this one is going to be movie villains. We're going to talk all about different movie villains, what makes a good villain. We're going to give you our top 5 movie villains. And just kind of see what happens. So bear with us as we go through this week's episode. And if you have any ideas, if you want to come on and talk about something, let me know. You can always reach out to me on Twitter or through email at driveineventide or driveineventide@gmail.com. So let's get to it. John had some ideas about what he wanted to come on. He's like, hey, let's talk about movie villains. So what makes a good movie villain to you?
Oh man, that's
kind of the root of the discussion.
That's a big question. I think it depends on the type of movie you're gonna make. Like, there's some movies to where like having a big, bad, scary villain that's just like he's the end goal. He's kind of like the final boss of the movie. Is more of what the movie needs to go for. But there's other movies where it's more intimate, more like character driven, more focused on the main character. You need a smaller villain that's more just pushing the protagonist along. I guess it's just dependent on the movie.
And you said that, so like this is kind of, we're going to veer away from the main question already, but you'd said like some movies, yes, you need this final boss. Obviously if people have been listening to this podcast, they know that I'm a huge Marvel Cinematic Universe fan. Well, the problem of the first phase or two, I'd say, were that you didn't really have that final boss. The final boss was in the movie. You didn't have something that kind of pushed your heroes beyond that. It's like, all right, Jebediah was dead in the first movie, and in the first Iron Man. The 10 Rings, they were all, like all these things that they didn't really have to go beyond that. So do you think that a movie, in order to be successful within itself, kind of self-contained, needs to have this idea of what may come as a villain? So for instance, your Darth Vader, who wasn't defeated in the first or the fourth, I guess, installation. Yeah. Like, what do you think is a better type, or does it matter?
I mean, if we're going to go along the lines of it's like a universe that you're going to keep expanding upon with sequels, then yeah, I think if you defeat the villain in the first movie, like that's kind of like what the prequels did wrong, is they had Darth Maul, but they defeated him in the first movie. Then they had Dooku, and he went to the third, but they killed him off in the first, 20-30 minutes. Yeah. So it was just... But Darth Vader, on the other hand, he went through all 3 movies. You learn more about him through subtle, just moments in the film. So I think if you are going to continue and keep expanding upon the universe you made in the movies, I personally prefer having one villain that keeps traveling with you, so that way it's not just it's a new person, that we don't have time to really grow attached to. Because I think that's a big part of villains is you have to feel something for the villain. Either you really like them, you really don't like them. It just depends on what they're written as.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's you bring up a really good point, because it's this idea that within, it depends on your long-term goal. I think that some of the best villains for me are ones that you are doing them justice enough in one movie. Now that doesn't mean that if you have a movie villain such as Darth Vader, for instance, that you aren't doing them justice if you allow them to be a villain in multiple movies. But it's very different. You either are telling the slow burn, allowing them themselves to have an arc. Loki comes to mind as being someone who just was supposed to be a one and done, but became, oh my god, you look at his arc over the 4 or 5 movies that he ended up in. Or you have, someone that is self-contained. A lot of people really, really liked the General Zod character within was it Superman Returns, and he's clear. I mean, to a lot of people's anger, he's no longer in that DC universe. But I thought he was very well put together in that one movie. So I guess it just depends on what you want out of it. Let me ask you another question with that. So you had said it depends on you have to feel something for this villain. What do you think of someone such as, let's say, like Scar, Lion King? Okay, so Scar is a villain who a lot of people look at and you're like, I can kind of side with him. In a weird way. You don't like what he's doing, but you can understand his reason for doing it. How important are a villain's motivations in the audience's perception of that character?
I mean, I think it definitely helps. Like with Scar, when he's the little brother, he's not going to become king. He's always going to be in the shadow of like his brother in that family line. So it's just we see that, we recognize that, so we kind of feel, especially if you are a little sibling like I am. So like I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a little brother too. But I don't think you have to have it though, because some villains can just be bad because they're bad. But I feel like if you want a more meaningful character that's going to at least help with the plot and really add more to everything, I think having motivations really does help.
Well, that brings up to mind like a character like Snape. I know, that we start to bring in literary villains and then it starts to blur the lines, but from what I have heard, they did an okay job within the movies. I have not, as an English teacher, it's a disappointment to my wife that I have not read all of the Harry Potter books. Most people find that out and they're like, are you serious? I just didn't like him. But I hear that Snape's portrayal throughout the entire series was fairly close to how he was portrayed in the book, so we can let that go. But Snape is a character that a lot of people, even early on in the first couple, he was definitely portrayed as a bad guy. Yeah. And some people still really enjoyed him. They liked the way that he was portrayed. It was almost like they had the soft side for the baddie.
Because at least in the very beginning of the first few, like 2 or 3 movies, when it wasn't really the whole chosen one has to save the whole world thing. Mm-hmm. It was more just like, he's just the villain because he's the strict teacher. Because we all have a teacher like that. But Snape carried himself in a way where it's like, okay, he's smart, he knows what he's doing, he earns the right to be that way because he's just been around for so long. He knows how it all works.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and for me, I look at characters like that and kind of calling back to last week's episode with Xander when we were talking about Christopher Robin. Nowadays, I'm watching movies through a whole nother filter, the adult filter. Like, I'm seeing things and I'm like, oh, absolutely. Like, Christopher Robin is just trying to save people's jobs and his kid's just mad that he can't play with him. Like, he's doing what he has to do as an adult. But, like, as a kid, I'd be like, oh my God, he's being such a jerk. Why won't he just play with his kid? You kind of see that. So you can almost watch any movie now, and a lot of people start to feel as adults, they're like, yeah, I mean, other than maybe Umbridge in Harry Potter, who I don't think anybody says like, oh yeah, she's clearly within her rights.
She's just doing her job.
Everyone's like, I don't know if there's as many villains. And she doesn't make my top 5 list just because, again, I didn't go into the Harry Potter field because I think people would, well, those that know that now everybody knows that I haven't read the entire series would be like, you don't get to talk about Harry Potter. But yeah, I think she's one of those characters that comes to mind when you're like, there's just no redeeming quality.
Yeah.
There's a handful of those, and maybe we'll see if some of those make our list. Speaking of our list, I think this is a good time just to debut the list and start with our number 5. So we're going to give you guys our countdowns, 5 down, and maybe there'll be a little bit of a discussion around these, seeing if they both make our list and whatnot and where they fall. But let's start with our number 5. So, John, what's your number 5 all-time villain?
He's going to be a newer villain. I'm going to go with Thanos from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Talking about big baddies and stuff like that. He's the final boss, the end game, the big push for all these characters. Like Infinity War, Iron Man says himself, he's been in my mind for 6 years. I can't get him out. Like he planned the attack on New York. He destroyed Xandar, which we don't even see on screen, but you can imagine how devastating that was. He easily got all the Infinity Stones. The only real struggle was with getting the Time Stone, but
yeah,
just
yeah. I mean, that is absolutely true. I mean, somebody who is, and that's one that I think within our discussion on episodes 25 and 26, if you guys want to go back and listen to those, little self promotion there. But yeah, we talked about that and kind of how the motivation of his was very noble in a very evil way of doing it.
He was a good guy that did bad guy things, which I think is really something that I enjoy in a villain. I also really liked how he won. I think I said that on the Infinity War podcast, but I still believe it. I still love that a villain won after 10 years of all these heroes either killing off their villain in one movie or the villain becoming good, like Loki, kind of becoming like a hero.
Well, and I mean, that seems to be, if you're going to do the long burn, you have to have that delayed payoff. I mean, we still don't have the end of his story. We're going to get a little bit more of it. We'll probably get a teaser of it in Captain Marvel, but then we'll get the conclusion to it in the second part of, Avengers 4, because they're not calling it Part 2 anymore. But yeah, I think it's kind of ironic that you have that as your number 5, because my number 5 is actually never really even seen. So I was thinking about, okay, what are some villains that have this impact? And while I don't think they are like the most impactful for not even being on screen, they probably ruined more childhoods than anybody else. Man from Bambi comes in as my number 5 villain.
Oh my goodness, I didn't think about Disney villains or anything like that.
Because I was thinking, and I was like, all right, I gotta have a Disney villain, because Disney has so many villains. I mean, we could do an entire episode just on Disney villains. But I'm thinking about these, and I'm like, there's not a whole lot of Disney villains that, and actually there probably isn't many outside of maybe Jafar, who have the long, more than one movie, because they don't have, sequels really don't come along in Disney all that often, at least in early days. But Man from Bambi, like, that scene of Bambi watching the mother die is just like, oh my god, this is awful. And you never even see the villain. The villain is kind of one of those entities that you're looking at it and you're like, well, what is, the symbolism behind it of like mankind destroying nature. And that was even when that come out in the 50s, I think, 50s or 60s. And so even then they were making those symbolic references. So one that lasts about 6 or 7 years of a slow burn, and one that has 0 screen time, completely off screen. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting way to start our countdown. So kind of going into that, let's talk about we talked about Thanos and kind of being someone who has a little bit of a redeeming quality. Now in today's cinema, we're seeing the rise of the anti-hero. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think it cheapens the role of both hero and villain?
I like anti-heroes, but they're also it's really confusing, because like, I think the problem is now we're kind of blurring the definitions of anti-hero versus villain, because I've always saw a villain as just the antagonist to the protagonist. Didn't really matter if they were doing good or bad things. Mm-hmm. Like, Deadpool is an anti-hero, but he's not a villain. Versus, like, you see movies where, like, the villain is the main character, so his antagonists, the villains of that movie, are like the good guys. Yeah, things like that. It's just, I like anti-heroes. I think they make good stories. I think it's really interesting to see someone who isn't always perfect and good, because it's more relatable that way. Because no one says they can relate to Superman and how he's always doing truth, justice, the American way, always saving the day, always does the right thing. But more people can be like Deadpool, to where, yeah, I agree, kill them, because they're just bad people. They don't deserve to live. I think it's just...
Yeah, I mean, I looked up, so ScreenRant.com has the best movie anti-heroes in history. And so I'm kind of prefacing this, that these aren't necessarily people that we think are the best, but they come up on this list. And so it might spur some ideas. First off, so the anti-hero, at least in my viewpoint, was just he is the protagonist, he or she is the protagonist of the film who goes about doing things in a negative way in order to achieve positive things. And that's how I would see it. So whether or not that's, everybody else's definition, that's at least where I'm coming from. So when you see someone like Deadpool, he's doing horrible things. He's killing people. I could even say, like, in some ways, Batman has ways of doing anti-hero because he's illegally capturing people. He is a what's the word?
Vigilante.
Vigilante. Thank you. I was like, it is escaping me. So he's doing things illegal for a positive light, and you look at, Logan, even, Wolverine is kind of a very, very good anti-hero because he will rip people apart in order to be, helping people. Spawn comes to mind. I'm probably bowling through this list before I even look at it. But one of the first ones that they say is Lou Bloom from Nightcrawler. Did you ever see that?
I don't think I ever did.
Oh, you got to go see Nightcrawler. He's basically the underbelly of society. Somebody who seeks out, basically seeking out like car accidents and all these horrible things in order to get the scoop as a reporter.
Wait, that's the one with Jake Gyllenhaal, right?
Yes.
I did see that movie.
Oh, it's
yes,
just awesome.
Very good. I would agree. That was a very entertaining movie.
And it's just, he completely goes out of the way of dropping the role of ethics completely, which is pretty cool. And that's what they go and talk about a little bit here. Another one is the driver from Drive. That one, another kind of guy who doesn't talk a whole lot, but he's definitely doing things in a negative way. Just going through here, some of these. One that almost made my top 5 list, but didn't, was Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. Another really strong one. Mad Max from the Road Warrior. Rambo from the First Blood series. I'm going to scroll. Oh, that's an interesting one right there. Zuckerberg from The Social Network. He's an anti-hero in real life.
He's Mark Zuckerberg. Man, brilliant guy.
Michael Corleone from Godfather. When a gangster is your focal point, he's definitely a criminal doing things, and is your protagonist in the film. One that I like a lot, though, is Alex from A Clockwork Orange. One of the worst people you can ever think about. Just a teenager doing horrible, horrible things, but you still like him. By the end of the movie, you feel bad. Have you ever seen Clockwork Orange?
I don't think so.
Oh, man, go out and watch that before. John's getting ready to go back off to college.
I'll have to start writing down my list of
He
movies.
needs to go see Clockwork Orange at some point. That's a Stanley Kubrick movie. And Alex, there's a scene in which him and his friends, this is towards the beginning of the movie, and they basically, for lack of trying to sugarcoat it, this isn't a spoiler, doesn't really give you anything, but they break into somebody's house and rape this man's wife in front of him. And while they beat him up, it's horrible. And you're like, how can you like this kind of person? By the end of the movie, though, you understand what he's doing. While you may not agree with it, you can understand it. And it's that understanding that pushes you to kind of say, he's a bad guy doing bad things, but he could be a good guy. Something out of his control made him bad.
One thing.
Yeah.
And it just pushed him the wrong way. Okay.
And you think of anti-heroes and you're kind of like, yeah, that kind of falls. It's like they weren't bad people by their own choice. Society or an act of horrible, outcome, like Punisher, his family getting killed, or Deadpool getting cancer, those kind of things that they can't control those things, and how they react to them is in a more negative light. So, the anti-hero, I don't know. I think that it's a good change of pace. I hope it doesn't become as large of an aspect in film, and it overtakes the hero villain, just because it does blur the lines, like you said. So I don't know. I mean, there are some very, very strong anti-heroes throughout the entire film history, and a lot of the ones that they're throwing out here are often well liked. Tony Montana from Scarface, all these characters that people end up liking for some reason or another. But I feel like if we go too far into that, Deadpool really worries me. I love both movies, and I think the comic itself is really well done. But I worry that Deadpool is going to make Hollywood say, "All right, anti-heroes all around." And then
I just don't want them to be like, "Oh my gosh, they paid a lot of money for R-rated movies and anti-heroes. Let's just all dive in there." And it's like, but you can't, because not every superhero, not every hero needs to be rated R or have that kind of anti-hero feel to it. Like Venom, I'm really excited for Venom.
That's another one that we hadn't talked about. Yeah,
I think he's always been an anti-hero to me. Even like he was Spider-Man's villain, but he was always sympathetic. He was always kind of that person that you just could see doing good things because he's just a man who got thrown that symbiote. Mm-hmm. And I'm really excited what they're going to do with him, at least from the trailers.
Well, that lethal protector concept, it was funny. Is the very first movie trailer for that came out, and a buddy of mine were talking, and I were talking, and I go, they're gonna end up doing the lethal protector comic series. And he's like, how do you know? I'm like, because look at him, he looks like a good guy. And the only comic series, at least the first one, I should take that back, the first one that really portrayed him as a hero was the Venom Lethal Protector, which is kind of Venom's first solo arc. He always and again, it's kind of funny that they if you look back over Venom's this maybe speaks to the anti-hero concept. Look back at all of his, they stopped before comic book issue 7. Like there's until I think it was like just recently, Venom would only get 6, 5, 4, maybe even less arcs. And you're like, why won't they get an arc? Because you just want to see it. You want to see him be faced with something and overaccomplish it. It doesn't. You can't slow burn an anti-hero. Yeah. It seems. At least that's like what they were figuring out with Venom. So that was interesting. I don't know. That worries me because I when we did the review, the trailer reviews for Venom, I was like, this looks amazing. I hope they don't just say, oh my god, we finally got a Venom movie. Nothing else matters. Like we're just gonna do everything that is Venom related in this movie. Like, slow burn it. It's okay.
Like, they don't need it. Like, with Superman Dawn of Justice, where they had Lex, they had Wonder Woman, they had all the Justice League, and they had Doomsday, and they killed Superman. They did, 5 years worth of DC content, and they ruined it. If they do that for Venom, I'm going to be really disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another thing, too, is what happens, so for instance, when we get a movie like Spider-Man 3, where you have 3 villains, you could even say 4, but 3 villains for sure that you're not really sure where to focus your attention. Yeah. I mean, what happens in that situation?
I think that's just really poor writing in the right, and when they make the film, and also with the studio wanting to push that. I do know for Spider-Man 3, the studio demanded they put Venom in the movie, which is a big reason why that was the way it was. But even beyond that, it's just 3 villains. If they were 3 villains that was a trio from the beginning and they were a team, if they were preluding to the Sinister Six, that kind of idea, I think that could have really worked. Could have been oh, Spider-Man beat all 3 of them, and then they're like, okay, now we need help, and they get more villains, and they started going towards. But
well, and I thought that, and a lot of people actually say that if you're looking at Spider-Man 3, the Sandman story arc is probably one of the only redeeming qualities of the movie. I wish they would have just made Sandman the villain. I really liked that arc that they were playing with, kind of making him almost an anti-hero in a way.
I liked that. It's just, I think the problem with that is then what do you do with Harry? Because they in the very throughout the first 2 movies, Harry's really I hate Spider-Man. I need to get revenge for my father. And the second movie, he finds the lab, so they can't just have a whole movie where that's just not a part of it. They have to address that at some point. So I love the Sandman story. Maybe that could have been hinted at and then addressed in the 4th. Yeah. Because there was supposed to be a lot more Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire and all that.
Thank God there weren't. I am probably I am in the minority here who hated him as Spider-Man.
I didn't like him as Spider-Man, but I liked him as Peter Parker.
I thought he was a better... I'm trying to think here. Remembering. Garfield, I thought was... Yes. He was. Maguire was a better Peter Parker. Garfield was a better Spider-Man, and Tom Holland's better than both of them.
Tom Holland's the balance.
Yeah,
and it's really nice because Andrew Garfield was just too cool.
You didn't believe that he was Peter Parker, but he had the sassiness. I thought the sarcasm.
But he's really funny as and charismatic as Spider-Man.
Yeah, but Tom Holland, our lovable neighborhood Spider-Man. All right, so let's go ahead and let's look at our number 4 here. Number 5, we'll do a countdown. We'll do a recap once we get to 3.
Number 4, I said Darth Vader.
Me too.
I had to put him on the list, but I didn't. But he's not number one choice because he's, in all honesty, he's not the real main villain of Star Wars.
It's true.
It's Palpatine.
Mm-hmm.
even like during 1, 2, and 3, that's Palpatine's saga, and then 4, 5, and 6, he's in the background and he's the real villain. But Darth Vader is a very menacing main force that Luke had to overcome for 3 movies, and I always thought that was really amazing, especially when the whole twist of "I'm your father," like that.
Yeah, the "I'm your father" is the like equivalent for like the 70s and 80s generation as to essentially the snap has been for our generation.
Yeah.
You know, of like, you knew something was going to happen. You didn't know who was going to go or if it was actually going to happen in this movie, what was going on. But I mean, can you imagine in a world where spoilers do not exist, to walk into a movie and find out that the worst bad guy in movie history, really for many teenagers, it's really like, oh my God, Vader, is now the father of the
hero? That's just amazing. And no one knew the secret. It was George Lucas, the director of the movie, James Earl Jones, and Mark Hamill. Only 4 people who knew the secret. It was just, that twist will always... Even I watch it still today, and that still kind of gets me a bit like, maybe this time you won't say that. Maybe this time it's not real. But
I love, if you guys get a chance, go and check these out on online. There's like parents showing their children the movies for the first time, and they're taping, watching their kids' reactions to the "I Am Your Father," and it's just like, oh my gosh, it is. It's having that, and I think it's funny that both of us put him at 4. But yeah, Vader absolutely has a hero's journey, but it's almost like a villain's journey.
It's a very depressing, sad.
And I don't even want to bring Anakin into it because there were some very strong elements. You know, maybe this should be another one of our topic episodes. But the first 3 episodes, in chronological order, 4, 5, and 6, were, yes, everybody says those are the best. But 1, 2, and 3 had their moments. I thought there were some really strong things from it. But people wanted 1, 2, and 3 to be like 4, 5, and 6, and they just weren't. That's a discussion for another day. Yeah. But Vader coming in at my number 4 as well. You know, we mentioned the hero's journey. What happens? I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Do you think that the hero's journey, because we have to have a villain for the hero's journey, it has to be something for the hero to overcome. Do you think this is a concept that's overplayed to the point where, I mean, you know it's going to happen more often than not, so like, what's the point?
No, I mean, I'm not sick of the hero's journey yet, personally. I definitely know it can get really dry and repetitive when it's always the same format. Like, you meet the hero, they're the underdog, they get thrown into this situation, and then they meet the villain, then they happen to beat the villain through, like, determination or, like, the power of love, or like, whatever they want to choose for that specific movie.
Huey Lewis.
Insert emotion to beat villain.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there are times when they kind of flip it, they kind of do twists on it that keep it interesting, and that's why I like the hero's journey, because there's so much that can still be done with it that I think just really keeps it alive.
I think the best part of this, at least the cinematic version of the hero's journey, is sometimes it takes the entire movie to find out whose journey you were actually watching. One that comes to mind, and here, if you haven't yet seen it, skip ahead like a minute, because I'm going to give some spoilers here. Have you seen Quiet Place?
Yes.
Okay, good. So at least me and John can have this conversation. So I think, for instance, in A Quiet Place, it seems like it is John Krasinski's story.
Yeah.
Like, the entire movie, it starts, he's your male protagonist, and it's kind of like his focus. Like, you just seem like you're seeing the movie through his. And by the end of the movie, you realize it wasn't his journey, it was his wife's journey. Because she outlasts everything, and she's continuing. Now, in a way, you could probably make a little bit of a debate that his journey concludes, so we are getting his entire journey, but I think that part of her journey is also overcoming the death of her husband, which is part of the villains, whatever they are, Cloverfield.
Yeah. I'd even go so far as to say it's almost the daughter's journey that we're focusing on a lot too, because the whole time it's like her wanting her father, like her making the mistake of giving her little brother the toy that got him killed, and then her feeling resented by her father about it, wanting to go and learn how to survive, but he won't let her. And then at the end, when he like signs "I love you," and then he like sacrifices himself for her, and then she figures out the trick with the earpiece to be able to defeat the aliens. I mean, but that's the beauty of it, is there are times when
screenplay writers and directors and filmmakers in general just decide to say, we're not going to do it as simple as following the template.
Yeah.
We do get those movies where it seems pretty obvious how it's going to play out. You get a little bit of twists and turns here. One that comes to mind is Black Panther. Black Panther, phenomenal movie. I loved it. But it was very traditional. Like, at least as far as, establishing the hero, having him overcome this obstacle, literally being, like, killed, quote-unquote killed, and then coming back to reclaim his throne. Like, it was done in a very, very strong way.
Yeah.
But it followed the template pretty closely.
Well, you knew he had to win.
Yeah.
Because he's Black Panther. And
you
can't have him lose in the first movie.
So there are ways that you can even follow the script and the template and say, all right, you can still make a good movie. But I think it's for me, as an audience member, I want to see those variations on the hero's journey. If you're going to give it to me, give it to me with a twist.
Which I think comes back to the villain. I think the reason why Black Panther was so good with that classic hero's journey was Killmonger was an amazing villain. Mm-hmm. They spent a lot of time focusing on him and making it seem like he was right, but his actions about being right were wrong.
And that's another thing too. Is I think that when you look at that movie, that's another example of a multi-villain movie. But they did a very good job of at least making it known that there was a number one, and then like 1A or number 2 or 3, however you go down the list. Like Claw. Claw was phenomenal. I love Andy Serkis, but you knew Killmonger was the number one guy. And there's a little bit of anti-hero almost in him. He had noble motivation, but again, doing things
it would have been interesting to see him live, and then like kind of like a Loki situation. He's alive, and then he's in prison, and then he comes out, and you get to keep developing him. Like with Infinity War, Black Panther left. If Killmonger was still there, they could have had him put in for Avengers 4 to be the King of Wakanda.
I'm so mad they killed him. Like they didn't need to.
I'm mad they did, but the way they did it makes it okay with me.
Yeah, I mean, because he would say like it's Killmonger, his character. If he doesn't die, maybe he's not as powerful as a villain. Because of his final lines and what he says as he goes out. That's absolutely right. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to give our number 3. After we give our number 3, we'll talk about it, and then we will go ahead and take our halfway break. So let's go ahead and recap here. Number 5, I had Man from Bambi. John, your number 5 again was? Thanos from the Infinity War. And essentially all the Avengers movies. And number 4 for both of us with Darth Vader from the Star Wars films. So, John, your number 3 movie villain.
All right, this is going to take a little bit different of a turn. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Whiplash.
Yes.
Terrence Fletcher, the teacher, J.K. Simmons' character, which I know is like Darth Vader, Thanos, totally go in a different direction with Fletcher, but if anyone hasn't seen Whiplash, it's essentially a kid goes to this amazing music school, and the teacher that he has to work with is a nightmare. He's probably the worst fear any college kid ever has of like their teacher is just a horrible evil monster.
Yeah.
And he really shakes the main character to the bone, really pushes him over the edge, and really drives him to get better. Like he's the reason the main character gets as good as he is in the movie, but the methods he goes about it is just that's really questionable. Like throwing a music stand at a kid and also like embarrassing him for everybody and throwing him under the bus. Like at the last scene of the movie when they're doing that last concert, he throws him under the bus, told him all the wrong music, he totally left him out to dry to ruin his career completely. Like gave him no possibility of a future, and then the hero to overcome that and earn Fletcher's respect. The fact that Fletcher finally decided, okay, you're the real deal, and kind of gave him that respect at the end. I think that's why he's on my list, because anyone could have been like really petty and resentful and just walk off and be mad about it, but he learned, you win, let's move forward.
Yeah, first off, you preface that with anybody, if you haven't seen this movie, this is what it's about. If you have not yet seen Whiplash, pause this podcast and go buy it, rent it, whatever.
3 years behind.
It's amazing. Whiplash was my favorite movie of, was it 2015 or 16? Yeah. Oh my God, it was phenomenally done. Just from a Miles Teller, up to this point was kind of just like the dorky kid. Like he didn't really do anything really good up to this point.
Yeah.
When he did Whiplash, oh my god, my respect for him went through the roof. And then he did Fantastic Four, and it kind of dipped a little bit. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, no, that's a good one. Mine is also not one of the ones that you would immediately think of. Not because he's not a villain like Teller was, but he's definitely a villain. But Javier Bardem's Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Just Javier Bardem. Actually, and he was in another movie that I just recently saw. Have you seen Mother with Jennifer Lawrence?
Yes.
I have seen that movie. So he kind of plays a similar role in a way to his Anton Chigurh. So Anton, essentially, for me, is this just amazing villain because he has no remorse, and it's kind of one of those things that he's essentially a serial killer, going around killing people all throughout the South, and he doesn't feel any guilt for it. And for me, I think that that's nothing more villainous than someone who has no redeeming qualities. And I think that his air compressor nail gun weapon, and every villain's as good as their weapon or their evil of choice, and for that is amazing. But there's this scene that he is talking with the owner of the kind of the gas station, I think it is.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it's just this idea of he's using this gas station worker owner's fear against him, and he's turning everything against him, and basically he gives him this opportunity to pick heads or tails for his life, and the guy doesn't even know. And so to take that ownership away from somebody, their own life, they don't even own their own life at this point, to leave it up to fate is just so villainous. So he comes in at my number 3. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and take a quick little break. We are going to refill our drinks, use the restroom, do all that fun stuff you do during a little break, and we're going to see what is coming up soon from Eventide.
Oprah's Book of the Month Club? Please. We've got something much better in store for you.
Let's talk about books. The energy is right. I got a candle going. It feels good.
Every Monday morning, Jessica Gillen sits down and talks with you about the very best in books and literature.
Murder on the Orient Express. The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter. The Cruel Prince.
It's The Bookseller, every Monday morning, brought to you by Eventide Entertainment. If there's one thing that's true about wrestling fans, it's how much they like to talk about wrestling. Join Aaron Lopez and Ben Norsworthy for the Top Rope Wrestling Podcast.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Tune in every episode and be ringside as these two break down all of the big matches in the world of professional wrestling. Brought to you by Eventide Entertainment.
We are back for the second half of episode 37, the villain discussion. We just got done with our number 3 villain. Again, mine was Anton Chigurh from the No Country for Old Men. Javier Bardem. I actually won an Oscar for that performance. And John, you're number 3 again?
Terrence Fletcher from Whiplash, who I think he won an Oscar as well.
I think he did.
Yeah.
And if he didn't, he should have, but I'm pretty sure he did.
Pretty sure he did.
Yeah, so some curiousness between our top 3, because our first one, John picked somebody who had probably the longest build of a villain's build that we've had in recent memory. Mine didn't have any screen time. We picked the same person for number 4, and then some weird similarities between our number 3s. And just so you guys know, he doesn't know who my top 5 are before we started, and I don't know his top 5.
So number 2 will be really interesting.
So I know one of the last 2 are going to get together in some way, shape, or form. It's either going to be my number 1, your number 2, or something. We'll see. We'll get there in a little bit. So yeah, we've been talking movie villains. We've been talking kind of the concepts of this. One thing we haven't gotten to yet, and it hasn't really come up in our lists yet. So let's steer toward into the swerve here. We toss this idea around before we started. What do you think happens, or what is your perception when you don't have a clear villain, or in the instance of a movie like The Happening, which Stills goes down as a horror, or like, I guess Geostorm has a bad guy, but where you've got something where it's like a storm is the villain, or something that it's a concept that's the villain, or you can't figure it out. You don't know who the villain is or what the villain is. What does that do for you when you're watching a movie?
I mean, I really like things like that. Like, I feel there might be a clear villain. One movie that comes to mind for me is Inception. I don't know if there's necessarily a clear villain. I might have to watch the movie again, but it's just...
I still don't know what happened in that movie.
Yeah,
I've seen it a few times.
But that's one of those movies that I really enjoyed, I love watching, and I really like thinking about, but there's not necessarily a clear villain. Is it the idea of doing an Inception for someone? Is it like the people they had to go against to get the Inception? Is it the government for keeping Leonardo DiCaprio's character from coming back? It's just one of those things that's not clear, but I feel like it was still really well done. And I don't necessarily think you have to have a villain in every single movie, or at least not one that's really super compelling and is as good as like Darth Vader or something like that.
You're not going to have a villain in like a drama. Not all dramas, or maybe like certain comedies aren't going to have villains, but like I think it's important that there is some push against, and you get your 3-act structure of like at some point there has to be a reason for your protagonist to have conflict. It could be themselves, hell. Like, I mean, they could be fighting their own inner demons kind of a thing. Or, in the case of many, many horror movies, actual demons. But I think I look at a movie like The Happening and I laugh at how stupid it was, but I applaud M. Night Shyamalan for at least taking a chance and doing something different. Have you seen The Happening?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, like... I don't think a lot of people took it for it being as serious as it seemed. It was kind of satirical. You don't put Mark Wahlberg at the front of your movie and expect it to be taken seriously. Yeah. I mean, like, he's not a bad actor, but he's not a serious actor. Like, put him in with Will Ferrell and let him go. And he, The Happening is one of them that comes to mind. Another one that comes to mind is... I just lost it. Geostorm, I'd said. Like, Geostorm, horrible movie, but, like, the concept is, like, you have people that are kind of pulling the strings to make this happen, so they're kind of the bad guys. I don't know, and then you've got things like, like Jaws. If Jaws is supposed to be the villain, but it's nature, like, he's just doing what the animalistic tendencies are, so, I don't know. I think it's important to have your villains. You need to have some kind of conflict. But it's tough. Like I look at a movie like Christopher Robin that we talked about last week, and your protagonist is kind of also your antagonist at times. Like there is a bad guy in it. But I don't know. You don't necessarily need one, but I think it makes it easier for the audience to follow if there's someone they're supposed to not like.
Yeah. I mean, a movie that pops out to me, The Way, Way Back with Steve Carell. I don't know if you ever seen that.
Yeah, very, very good movie.
Steve Carell's the bad guy, but he's not a bad guy. He's just, from the perception of the protagonist, he's just the stepfather they're not even married, I don't think. The stepfather who's also cheating on his mom. He's also just kind of rude and doesn't really have consideration for him. But he's not like a villain. He's not out doing bad things except for like cheating on his mom. And I think that's something that really stands out well. There's not a villain, but there's someone you can still identify as a bad person. Well,
and that's kind of the idea of it's a concept. It's the stepdad.
Yeah.
It's the idea of the kind of interrupting or overstepping parent who's not really a parent and they don't know the boundaries, especially for a growing child. I remember, and I was like, Steve Carell is a bad guy? No, but he played it well. Like, he played it, and it wasn't necessarily a bad guy. He just kind of was a dick at times. He just
was being a person.
And then you can throw out movies such as, well, I mean, like, you know who the bad guy is, but you don't really ever know who the bad guy is until the very end. The Usual Suspects with Who is Kaiser Soze? for those of you who haven't yet seen it, it's 1995 when this came out, so come on, people. But I won't give it away just in case, because it is such a good reveal. But, I mean, it's just one of those things that you spend the entire movie trying to figure out who is the villain, and then when you realize it, you're like, oh, okay. Like, it's a good payoff, but the movie itself is pushed, the plot is pushed, behind this idea of who is your villain. So without a villain, the movie, has no payoff. Or it's like you don't have a villain, but you're in search of it.
Yeah.
Another one that comes to mind again, so Zodiac. Probably one of my least favorite movies of all time. Might be the only movie I've fallen asleep in theaters. It bored me that much. An unsolved murder, still to this day, you can't have an ending. Like, you can have, I don't know, you can kind of lead toward, like, oh, this guy might be. You have a very
obscure ending, but you can't. Yeah. You can't resolve the film.
So I don't know. But, I mean, that's one of those things. I think it's fun. It's different.
Like, done well, it can be really entertaining, but there's not enough that are done well, I feel like, to really justify it yet.
Yeah, and I agree. Let's look at our number twos. I got an interesting kind of discussion between our 2 and 1, so we'll go that way, depending on what we talk about for our number 2. So, our number 2 villain, John, who did you have for number 2?
He was gonna show up on one of our lists eventually. It's gotta be the Joker from The Dark Knight.
Okay.
He has to show up. He's so iconic. He changed the game of not just comic book villains, but just villains in cinema at all. He was so grounded, but so crazy. He was so, like, mild-mannered, but so outlandish. He was so conflicting in everything that he did, that he just made such an impact. And he was the perfect foil for Batman, which is how the Joker's written, but the way they portrayed it worked perfectly with how the Dark Knight trilogy was made, and this Joker just fit in so perfectly. And rest in peace, Heath Ledger, because he would have made The Dark Knight Rises would have been amazing with him in it instead of Bane.
Oh yeah, I know, that's a disappointment. Yeah, I mean, okay, so talking about Joker, who do you think does he come in then as your best portrayal of the Joker?
Yeah, I mean, I like the Jack Nicholson Joker. It's just he was a little too goofy when he was trying to be serious. I mean, I know that was also the tone of the film.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But I don't know. The way that, like, the Heath Ledger Joker really, he was a very terrifying villain, but I never thought at one moment he was just gonna, like, do anything that I didn't think he never, like, stuck to one thing. Like, if you thought, oh my gosh, he's so terrifying because he starts killing people, turns around, he's not killing people. He doesn't want to kill Batman. He doesn't really kill any of the guards. He just wants his phone call, which the phone call leads him getting out of the prison. Mm-hmm. And just everything's so perfectly in place. And it's really interesting how it's a mix of he's really good at planning and he's also super lucky. Like, yeah, that level of luck is usually something you give to the hero, or you give to the good side. Where, like, oh, that shouldn't have happened, but it did. And to see a villain get that and be able to work with it and be able to twist it into something evil and chaotic like that is just amazing. Plus, the Dark Knight, the Joker, he technically won, if you think about it. If you go into the end of the Dark Knight and into the Dark Knight Rises, he won.
Yeah.
He did what he wanted to do.
He was caught, but he didn't care that he was caught. You know, yeah, I so wish we would have gotten more out of him. That discussion of who's best, I think, it's kind of one of those things where you're like, well, they all do everything differently. Many people even say Mark Hamill's Joker is the best. His portrayal within the Arkham video games as well as the animated series. But then you have his portrayal, but all his is just vocally. Jared Leto's, I even thought, had some positives.
Okay. I just feel like he wasn't in the movie enough for me to really give judgment.
And we're not even going to get another opportunity because apparently he's off, and now we have Joaquin Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix as in the noir style Joker film. Which
I'm pumped because he has made a comeback, a very strong film comeback after kind of going off the deep end. which we still don't know if that was real or fake or what not. If you're not sure what we're talking about, go look up Joaquin Phoenix David Letterman interview. He's either the best actor ever, or he showed up on Letterman completely high or drunk or both, and just out of it. No one kind of really knew. It's just bizarre. And then he came back with "I'm Not Here," a really weird explanation documentary, which some people think it was all stunt. I don't know. It got people talking about him, and now he's back. He's going to
be the Joker in an 80s noir film, which
I'm excited.
It's going to be so good if they actually make it with how DC's going.
So my number 2, very, very, very different from yours. This one has no business being in any other conversation other than the fact that this, and people are going to rip me for this, I absolutely loved this movie. It's the stupidest movie. But when you have a movie that has all of the characters that it does in it, and you end up, at least in me, talking about this character, and it has no business, an actor that has... I'm building this up bigger than it should be. An actor who has no business even portraying this type of character. Have you ever seen the movie Mystery Men?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, you're not going to know. I'm going. My number 2, beating even Darth Vader, is Casanova Frankenstein, played by Jeffrey Rush. Casanova Frankenstein is basically this. He's a villain who is trying to. He wants the good guys to win, because if the good guys keep winning, then he can keep fighting. Like if he wins, then he's done, and he likes to fight. He likes this concept. And so this whole idea, Captain Amazing is played by Greg Kinnear, and he helps get out because he's bored. It's kind of that whole concept of I'm a superhero who's literally beat everybody. So he helps get Frankenstein out, and then it turns on him, and Frankenstein, melts him. But Casanova Frankenstein it's a comedy, Mystery Men. It's got Ben Stiller.
Awesome.
Oh, it's such a bad movie, but it's really, really good.
Sounds hilarious.
William H. Macy. It's basically what would happen in real life if people wanted to be superheroes. And then there were a couple potential superheroes that did exist, but everybody else wants to be superheroes. Casanova Frankenstein is just so much fun. He's a breath of fresh air to this kind of discussion of villains. And Jeffrey Rush, just amazing, an amazing actor. He probably could be on this list as Barbossa in the pirate movies.
Yeah.
I mean, he's plays a villain. He plays a good guy too, pretty well, but he plays a villain just very well. And I'm trying to find it here. I don't know if I'm going to get to it. But it's this idea of there's so many different very stupid characters in this movie, as you can probably tell. If anybody who dresses up like a superhero and tries to be one probably isn't the smartest. And he's the smartest person in the room, but he can't win. It's frustrating for him because he's like, how am I losing to all of you? But there's... where is it at? There's a line where you've got all the different villains groups and all the gangs are coming together, and there's one that's a bunch of jocks, and he's trying to show them his new death ray, and one of them comes up and they're partying, and he's like, hey everybody, we're gonna go and see this, and one of the guys goes, oh dude, can we bring the brewskis? And he's got this Transylvanian accent. He's like, yes, you may bring the brewskis. And just, I don't know. It's so stupid. Again, people are going to rib me for this because it really just has no business being in here. But Casanova Frankenstein, to me, is just such an outstanding character. So if you haven't seen Mystery Men, go check it out. It's a really, really funny movie. Hell, it might even make some of your guys' lists as well. Okay, so I said I had a little bit of an idea going for what we should talk about going into this last little section here. Kind of wanted to see your idea of movies where, villain-wise, the villain that you feel outshined, I guess, your hero. The one that had a much more lasting effect on you than the hero did.
Oh man, there's a few I can think of. One obviously is definitely the Joker from The Dark Knight.
Yeah,
because he just stole the whole show every scene he was in. I know personally for me, it's like there's so many coming in at once. Like it's really hard to form the right put all the thoughts together. Just from the Dark Knight, I personally really liked Voldemort a lot more than I liked Harry Potter, which I know is going to sound really weird because you spend 8 movies really spending all your time with Harry Potter, but Voldemort's just, I don't know, something about him being just evil and dark and.
Well, Harry's kind of the character that kind of even though his life wasn't that glamorous, his fame probably got a little annoying. You're like, okay, it's Harry Potter, yeah, we get it. I
do know one character, Khan from Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Either the original Star Trek or Star Trek Into Darkness with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah,
I love Chris Pine, I love Captain Kirk, I love Zachary Quinto, but Benedict Cumberbatch just brought something new, brought something really powerful to that character, and I don't know. I watch that. When I watch scenes from that movie again, I always make sure I go to his scenes, like when he's talking about his family and how he thought his crew was dead. He thought that they were alive, and he would do anything for his family. And he just had all this anger and sadness all in just one swoop. It's just so powerful. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Khan is a really strong one. I think you can throw potentially Vader into that discussion. A lot of people felt more connected to Vader than they did than Luke, because Luke's a whiny kid. I look at movies that the villain stands out more, and you've got your slasher movies, which are clearly, I mean, they're almost the protagonist, and everybody's getting in their way. But, also too, I look at, for me personally, I'm trying to remember the character's name. Give me 1 second here. So the movie, The Patriot, another Heath Ledger movie. But Mel Gibson, clearly the hero in this. But for me, Jason Isaacs playing, was it Colonel William Tavington? This guy he plays Malfoy, Lucius Malfoy. If you're not really good with names, but that's who Jason Isaacs is. Such a strong portrayal as the villain. He's basically the British redcoat, but he just has no mercy. He's what you expect out of war. Yeah. And Gibson movies do a really good job of portraying the realities of war. And he burned an entire church with an entire town's people. An entire town's worth of people in it, and he's like, all right, you didn't care, and all the men are like, really? Like, they showed the morality, the ethics of it, and he's like, no, it's war. So he's one that stands out. But yeah, I think that I don't know, I think it's an interesting conversation when it comes to the villains that stand out more than your heroes, because sometimes your heroes, you're like, eh. For me, you could say that about any DC character. I think the heroes are always kind of meh in comparison to their counterparts, especially Batman. I hate Batman, and some people love Batman. I love Batman's villains. I think they're fantastic.
Villains are good. Batman himself is just. I agree. Batman's definitely not my favorite.
But yeah, it is what it is. One last topic before we get into our final one, and we send this one home. I kind of alluded to it a little bit with my Casanova Frankenstein. What do you think the role of villains in comedy movies are? Because they're definitely there. I mean, even if it's not like the villain as we've been talking about them.
I think they're just a way to keep the movie going. They're just, like you said, you have to have conflict for the protagonist no matter what kind of movie you have. And just having them in a comedy, it's just, they can also be your comic relief of the movie. Having that really bad villain who's just not good at being a villain. Like, in the Smurfs, the Balthazar? I don't know.
No.
Not Balthazar, that's totally wrong. But the guy who's hunting after the Smurfs.
Yeah.
He's hilarious, and he's really bad at being a villain, but he's really fun. Gargamel, that's it. Characters like that, when they're so bad, they're really entertaining, like the Team Rocket from Pokemon, which I know isn't a movie, but
yeah,
they have movies, so it's...
They're in movies.
They're in movies, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, like, you look at, like, Dr. Evil, or Fat Bastard. We're not going to talk about Goldmember. Talk about beating a dead horse. Love those movies, but come on, the third one was a little rough. But then I one of my favorite villains, and a couple of the listeners will hopefully agree with me, specifically Nick, if he's listening to this episode. Regina George, one of the best villains in a.
She's such a good villain.
She's such a bitch.
I know.
Just like everybody, if you went to high school, you knew somebody. Like you might have been that person. I'm sorry, you were the bitch of high school, but you at least knew them. And I think Regina George is one of those that sometimes the reality in kind of a satirical movie where you're like, they're not really like, there aren't people like that. No, sometimes there are people like that. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. Looking at our number one all-time villain. Go ahead, John.
Okay. Well, went through like Thanos, Darth Vader, all these really big famous villains that everyone like knows or understands why. This one, my top one choice, comes from my favorite movie ever. Like this is the movie I can watch over and over and over again. I'll never get sick of. It's Jurassic Park. It's the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, because it being my favorite movie, a big part of that is being the dinosaurs. And I know it's like the dinosaurs, they're just like creatures. That's not really. I don't know, just that movie being able to start off by showing us the wonder and beauty of the dinosaurs in the beginning, when you see the Brontosaurus, then you see all the herds of dinosaurs, to flipping the switch, to bringing so much fear out of nowhere with the T-Rex and the Dilophosaurus, the one that kills the big fat guy who causes the problem. I don't know.
That's what that's called? I just always called it like the acid thing.
I think it's called the Dilophosaurus because they say that in the tour, and then another dinosaur shows up. I'm pretty sure that's that. And then the Velociraptors. I didn't put any one by themselves because they're not one dinosaur is really chasing them enough to be the one villain. But
yeah, and I think that in some ways too, it's hard to even say. Like some people might say, well, like the T-Rex. Well, T-Rex is kind of the good guy in some.
I mean, he
aspects.
saves them, but he saves them because he's doing what he does, which is a big thing I like about the Jurassic Park. Well, I like almost all the Jurassic Park movies, but Jurassic Park 1 is definitely the best still.
Yeah, one stands out.
With their creatures that were created, they're put in this environment that's nothing like what they were born and bred to be a part of. They're just doing what they do. They're being animals. It'd be kind of like you were in a zoo and then all like the carnivorous animals like lions and tigers and all these animals got out and you were stuck trying to escape from the zoo with them, but they're dinosaurs instead. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So my number one, like I said, it was going to happen. My number one is Heath Ledger's Joker. For me, to me, there's nothing better than a villain who, and this is kind of why, you look at some of my others with Isha Girth and having talking about Jason Isaacs' character. The lack of a morality, literally just wanted to watch the world burn. The discussion that when he's burned to the fire, and he's like, I don't care. It's not about the money. It's not about the fame. I just want to add a little chaos. That's a really strong villain. When the villain is, I mean, he will probably go down in film history as top 5 all time. At least we have this conversation on an evening in Ohio, and we put him in our top 5. But who cares what we think? But you look at everybody in the annals of time, he's going to go down as one of the best. Just the portrayal, the actor himself too, comes into the account, at least on my discussion here, because you look at what he did. So much of the improvisation of just creating this character from the ground up. We all know who the Joker was going into this, but he reinvented a character that was grounded and rooted in many people's minds. So when you're able to do that and just change the game, like you had said, completely, he ends up rounding out my top 5. Any honorable mentions that you were struggling to try to find a place for, but they didn't make your list?
There's a few. Khan from Star Trek. Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. She's definitely up there. You said Regina George. There's Loki, but I don't know if he counts as a villain anymore. It's kind of murky water. Lex Luthor from like the older movies, not this Jesse Eisenberg. one.
Yeah.
Just there's so many iconic villains. It would be a whole separate one just for honorable mentions of great villains.
Yeah, I'd say one of mine that I really wanted to find a place for, The Wicked Witch of the West, kind of one of those classics. She just, that cackle just was phenomenal. Also wanted to try to find a place but couldn't. But for Agent Smith in the first Matrix movie, I don't really talk too much on that. The second one had its place, but it got a little weird. But Agent Smith, very strong use there of a villain. And then I don't know. I felt like there was a couple more Disney villains that should have made their way in. Really, really feel like Scar could have been, Jaws could have been in my list. Cujo. I always liked. I'm a real sucker for those kind of supernatural or just not your unnatural villains. Your villains that are just villains because. And I think that the shark from Jaws, Cujo, those kind of, even though the movie was not very good. I remember watching the movie after reading the book in high school, and I was like, this book's amazing. And I watched the movie, and I was like, oh, this isn't that good. But yeah, I mean, every movie has some sort of force going against the protagonist, and sometimes they are memorable, sometimes they're not. So hopefully our discussion tonight gave you something to talk about. Anything else that you've got for us tonight, John?
In regards to villains, I mean, there's plenty of great villains. I always enjoy. I think if a movie's going to be good, it has to have a good antagonist, whether it be a person or an idea or something to act against the protagonist. And I still stand by that. I haven't found a movie that kind of broke the pattern for me. A movie's as good as its villain, and I feel like as long as the villain's good and the hero's good, you're going to have a good movie. If it's done right, but you can have a great villain and then totally mess up the whole movie.
It's very true. You don't want your unless your intent is for your villain to outshine your hero, you may lose your audience if they can't really get behind.
Yeah, it'd be like Schindler's List if all the Nazis were outshined the rest of the movie. That would have been really bad, but
yeah, we don't want the Nazis to win. We're gonna be okay with them losing this one. All right, so that is it for us this week. Next week we might be taking a week off. As I said, you guys are familiar. I am a teacher, and we are getting back to school. I might not be able to go see a movie or have time to record here in the next week. Otherwise, though, we definitely will be back by the end of the month to see. My wife will be back on, and usually she is the fill-in, but this time there was a movie that there's a movie that she saw that it just screams me and her. It's crude, it's awful, it's going to be gross and funny as hell. The Happy Time Murders. We'll be watching that at the end of the month, and with Melissa McCarthy. And a lot of puppet sex and just gross, awful things that you shouldn't see on the big screen. But we're gonna see it because it's gonna be funny. We're gonna have a good time. So we will be watching that by the end of the month. Who knows? I might even be on before then. But if not, we will see you guys at the end of the month with Happy Time Murders. John, thanks again for coming.
Oh, great! It was a lot of fun.
Hopefully we can get you on. Maybe get you do a remote one from college.
Maybe.
But yeah, enjoy college.
Oh, I'm very excited.
Yeah.
Thursday.
Moving up. He is on his way. So if you guys want to write in and tell John some cool things to do in college, just remember he has a girlfriend. So we want to be careful about what we tell him. So all right, guys, that is it for us, and I will see you guys at the end of the month. Drive home safe.